Pop quiz. Who would win in a fight? Goku or Superman? If you answered Superman, then the internet probably hates you. Goku, the star of the hit TV show Dragon Ball Z, as well as a couple of other fairly successful shows, is one of the most beloved heroes of our generation. Sure, our parents had He-Man and G.I. Joe, but those guys never straight up killed the bad guys in the most awesome way imaginable. Dragon Ball Z was one of the most important TV shows I watched as a kid, and it's a tragedy that it's never really gotten a good live-action movie adaptation. We can all hope that one day a movie studio worth its salt will try to do Goku and company justice, but there's a few things they'll definitely need to get right. I'm the movie chef, and we're going to talk about the 5 steps for a perfect Dragon Ball Z movie. So what's the first thing that you'll need when trying to make a successful movie about martial arts, aliens, and giant totem poles? Well, you really ought to have this story take place in the real world. Now, I promise I'll only mention this movie a few times, but Dragon Ball Evolution made no sense. If I went into detail on all of the reasons it didn't make sense, this video would have to be titled 100 Steps for Making an Adaptation Even Worse Than the Ghost Rider movies. And one of the biggest reasons it didn't make sense was the fact that they were never really clear about the setting. At the beginning, it basically seemed like they were in a world a lot like ours, especially when Goku went to that house party. And they even had cars that looked exactly like ours. But as the movie went on, it became more and more clear that there was also some futuristic technology at the hero's disposal. The show was never as vague. There were flying cars, capsules that could hold entire houses, and talking animals to let the audience know that this was a fantasy world. But I think our movie should try to be a little bit more grounded. Usually a science fiction movie has 1 or 2 fantastical elements, with the rest of the movie being things that exist in the real world. Star Trek had space travel, Iron Man had a super suit, and The Matrix had, well, The Matrix. That's because of something called suspension of disbelief. It's the idea that a storyteller and an audience have an unspoken agreement. The audience will suspend any disbelief they have about a particular story as long as the story doesn't give them anything that's too hard to swallow as truth. In a Dragon Ball Z movie, you're not only telling people to believe that there are superpowered aliens out there, but you're also asking them to believe that there are superpowered humans here on Earth. In the context of a movie, you're going to be getting an audience that's unfamiliar with a lot of these ideas, and the best way to make them comfortable with it is to make the setting something they're familiar with, the real world. And speaking of fantastical ideas, no Dragon Balls. Now, I understand that this may seem like a bad idea. After all, Dragon Ball is right there in the title, but there's actually a lot of issues with having the Dragon Balls exist. First of all, and probably the biggest problem here, the Dragon Balls make death unimportant. In the show, this is constantly an issue. They even wish an entire planet's populace back into existence during the Frieza saga. But another reason not to have the Dragon Balls in this movie is because in the show Dragon Ball Z, they're never really that important to the plot. I mean, yes, they wished people back to life with them, but it's never used as the story's centerpiece. That's mainly because the show Dragon Ball was where that kind of story was fleshed out. Dragon Ball Z never really went there, and that was probably the secret to its larger popularity. Watching a team of adults fight godlike adversaries is a lot more interesting than watching a bunch of kids look for artifacts. And don't worry, I know you're already typing in the comments section. What about the title? You can't call a movie Dragon Ball Z and not have Dragon Balls in it. But guys, I'm the movie chef. I've got this figured out. You probably already knew that Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z were based on a manga series of the same name. But what you probably didn't know is that the manga series itself is an adaptation of an ancient Chinese legend. The story follows the adventures of a monkey named Sun Wukong, which in Japanese translates to Son Goku. In the story, he wields a magical staff, rides a flying cloud, and beats the gods themselves in battle. So why not make the title of our Dragon Ball free movie The Legend of Goku? That has a kind of mythological sound to it, and the fans of the cartoons and manga will instantly know what it's about, even though it has a different title, because it features the name of our main character. And speaking of the protagonist, it's super important that they get get Goku right? Now, the first step to this, I think, is casting someone of either Chinese or Japanese descent to play Goku. Not only would this again honor the story's roots, but there's really just not enough Asian men and women starring in action movies in America. And that's not only bad from a business perspective if you're trying to gain a wide audience, but it's also boring. But one of the other keys to getting Goku right is being true and adapting his personality. This is probably the biggest issue I had with the Dragon Ball Evolution movie. They completely ignored what Goku is supposed to be like and instead turned him into basically Spider-Man. And don't get me wrong, I love Spider-Man, but in the same way that Superman shouldn't be done too much like Batman, Goku should really be his own kind of character. You see, his origin shares a lot of motifs with many of the famous American heroes, but the way he reacted to his origins is very different. For example, he came from a planet of superpowered beings, just like Superman, but he doesn't live the perfect farm boy life like Clark Kent gets to. Instead, he accidentally kills the man who adopted him, leaving him to raise himself. And he doesn't react to his loved ones' deaths in the same way that someone like Spider-Man or Batman does either. He definitely harbors guilt for his grandfather's death once he finds out that he was responsible, but he doesn't let that permanently bring him down. He remains a light-hearted, easygoing guy, and that dichotomy in Goku is one of the things that makes the show so interesting. All at once, he's both the murderer of the man he respected most and a kind, loving man with a heart of a child. The only time he even takes things seriously is when he's up against a tough opponent. And speaking of his opponent, I think it's obvious that Vegeta should be the villain. Now, we've gotten to the part of this recipe where we really have to start talking about potential sequels. I know this seems silly, but it's the kind of thing a studio should always be thinking of with a big franchise movie like Dragon Ball Z. And the potential for sequels is what makes Vegeta a must-have villain for this movie. Because as fun as it is to have Vegeta on the dark side, he's even more amazing when he's fighting with the good guys. Not to mention the fact that the scene from the show when Goku finally has Vegeta beaten, but chooses not to kill him, is one of the most amazing things ever. Like, I would almost adapt that scene directly for the movie, it's so good. And another great thing about Vegeta is that, like many of the greatest villains, he's got a British accent. Well, at least in the English dub. This means that you could get so many different amazing British actors to play him. Imagine someone like Benedict Cumberbatch or Tom Hiddleston getting the role. You would automatically get the fans of those actors into the theater seats alongside the Dragon Ball fans. Although, my personal favorite pick would be Rufus Sewell. And in Knight's Tale, Sewell played a villain almost identical in the elitist, military-centric sadism that makes Vegeta so lovable. And once you've got such a great villain in the movie, all that's left will be to follow the show's basic plot structure. No, I'm not talking about entire episodes consisting of people just screaming at each other. Don't worry. What I'm talking about is the way the show tends to keep Goku away from the main conflict until the very end. Now, this may seem like a cheap tactic, but it's actually used in a lot of classical stories, all the way from the Bible to the Odyssey. It's especially easy to imagine since this will be telling the origin of Goku. While Krillin, Piccolo, and company are busy battling against Vegeta and Nappa, maybe, it would make perfect sense for Master Roshi to be training Goku on his island. During the training, we can see that Goku excels physically, but that he's struggling emotionally with the fact that he killed his grandfather. And in the end, when the other heroes are all either dead or nearly dead, Goku could finally man up and join the battle. Not just because his martial arts training is over, but because he's finally forgiven himself for Gohan's death. And then it would basically just be like the cartoon, in that the fighting would be so freaking awesome that I would totally squeal like a little girl in the theater. Then a series of well-choreographed fight scenes could wrap things up in an artistically appealing way. Anyways, that's just been my recipe for the perfect Dragon Ball Z movie. Do you agree? Disagree? Do you think Hollywood should even be giving this franchise a second chance? Let me know in the comments, and as always, be sure to subscribe. Until next time, I'm the Movie Chef. Hi guys, thanks for watching. I hope you liked the video. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment, you know the drill. If there's anything I talk about in the video, I try to link to it down in the doobly-doo, so let me know if I forgot anything and I can add that. I'll be trying to upload these once a week, so if you want to watch last week's episode, you can click down there. And if you want to watch next week's episode, just tune in around the same time. I don't think there's anything else, so I'll see you guys next week.